If the vice presidential debates proved anything, it's that Mike Pence is a liar and a fraud. For all of his charades about being a devout Christian, someone needs to tell that man that there's nothing Christian about butt fucking a woman like that on live TV.
Never tell them who I am. Well, how can I'm a man. Six shooters in both my hands. I'm a cold-blooded brother, a real bad mother. Watch out, honey, here I am.
So the first and only vice presidential debate is in the books, and it was a clear win for Mike Pence. He cut Kamala to shreds. It was pretty embarrassing for Kamala, actually. And so before we get going into the substance of the debate, let's talk about the debate itself, because this one was much better and far more substantive than the first presidential debate. Susan Page did a much better job of moderating than Chris Wallace did. She actually let the candidates talk and get their points across, and she didn't get too overzealous when they went over time. She also didn't seem to pick sides the same way that Chris Wallace did. I never got that sense that Pence was debating both Kamala and the moderator the way that Trump had to do in the presidential debates. I mean, in the presidential debates, there were times where it just felt like it was a wrestling match and, Biden was just tagging in Chris Wallace to go in and try to finish Trump off. It was also a much more cordial debate. It was much more polite, so there wasn't nearly as much interrupting, and it felt a bit more like what we should be expecting from a debate. It wasn't as entertaining, of course, but it certainly was far more substantive. When I saw that the candidates were seated, my first reaction was kind of a what the hell. It looked weak. And considering that the Democrats pushed for a seated debate between Biden and Trump, I can only assume that this was actually at the Democrats' behest. But, that's an assumption. I could be wrong. It may well have been the debate commission. I don't really know. I wasn't behind the scenes. But as the debate progressed, I actually kind of realized there might have been some merit to having the candidates seated. Because it allowed Pence to just sit there and take notes when Kamala Harris was giving her arguments, and that really might have helped him slice her up with such surgical precision, because he did. There was nothing that Kamala fed him that he wasn't ready for, that he didn't have a comeback for, and you could see him while Kamala was speaking. He was sitting there taking notes and writing things down, and so while I think the optics of them seating, or I keep saying seating, not sitting, while the optics of having them seated was a little weak and was a little weird, I think from a strategic standpoint, it actually, I think, helped Pence a little bit more. And if I am right that the Democrats were the ones pushing for a seated debate, it's just another example of how Democrat strategies to try to gain an edge end up backfiring. We're starting to see that now with the mail-in balloting. We're starting to see all of these votes, all of these ballots getting turned away. And it's funny because most of the conservatives are going to go vote in public. Vote in person, where the Democrats are mostly going to be voting by mail. And they're the ones who are going to be disenfranchised, getting their ballots rejected. So it is kind of funny to see how everything the Democrats do always seems to backfire on them. But in the end, I don't really have a strong opinion either way on having the candidates seated during the debate. I do think I suspect that it actually might have helped Pence more than they were anticipating. Just him being able to sit there and prepare for his responses a little bit better than having to remember everything Kamala was saying and then go off the cuff. He was able to kind of take some little notes and that kind of thing. But speaking of Kamala's performance, predictably, she relied on the establishment media narratives and did not seem to have any original thoughts in her head. So one thing that I think it might be kind of important to note is that having a media that so unilaterally functions as a coalition of Democrat operatives, it may have made Kamala's talking points feel more fabricated. At this point, it's painfully obvious that the media holds the reins on the Biden campaign, and that the candidates themselves, Biden and Kamala, they're just going around picking up whatever the media puts down for them. And so they don't really even seem to be in charge of what they're doing with their campaign. Granted, they're not even really fully campaigning, as Biden seems to be hidden in the basement for most of the campaign. They had, I think it was 9 lid days, it might have been 11 lid days in September, where the Biden campaign essentially just called a lid on the day, wasn't going to go out and talk to anybody, wasn't going to go see people as early as 8 o'clock in the morning. I think the latest one was at like 11 o'clock in the morning. But either way, they pulled the plug on their campaign activities for the day, which of course further leads to speculation that Joe Biden just simply can't handle the rigors of a campaign. And if he can't handle the rigors of a campaign, how is he going to handle the rigors of an actual presidency? Especially when we see Donald Trump going and flying to 2 different cities, doing multiple rallies a day. And he's almost as old as Joe Biden, but he has that Trump vitality, that Trump vigor to him that Biden, sleepy Joe Biden, clearly does not have. But just like Joe Biden, Kamala also relied on the dishonest, disingenuous, good people on both sides lie, among many other lies. She also uttered the completely dishonest line that Trump only paid $750 in income taxes. Again, they're just picking up what the media is putting down for them, and they're not really coming up with any strategy of their own. So, while Trump seems to lead from the front, these people are leading from the back. And that doesn't really show well for the Democrats, or Joe Biden and Kamala Harris especially. She also proved that there's not really anything that the Democrats can do to dress her up as likable. She tries to play this cute thing sometimes where she does that fake little laugh, that laugh. Hillary Clinton did the same thing, where she would do this laughter to try to make her seem like she had a lighthearted side to her. But it doesn't resonate as true. It doesn't feel real. And every time, of course, in any debate, there's going to be a little bit of interrupting and talking over, because there's going to be that urge to say, to call bullshit when you see bullshit. But every time Pence did that, and he did it very mildly. He didn't do it like Trump, where he just shoehorned himself into the argument. He would just add something in there. She got very defensive, and she would do this whole, "Excuse me, I'm talking here. I'm talking" routine, and it was really off-putting. And Pence had a great fireback line when she did that by responding that, well, it'd be important if you said the truth. And so it was kind of funny that Pence was able to kind of channel in some Trumpian quick-witted jabs, which really hit home, and you could tell it knocked Kamala Harris off of her game. And one thing that Pence really got her on, Kamala Harris kept saying that Biden would not raise taxes on people making under $400,000, but she also boasted that on day one they would do away with the Trump tax cuts, and that really seemed like they were. It was such an obvious underestimating of the American people's ability to see that both of those statements can't be simultaneously true. If you can't claim that you're not going to raise taxes on anybody making under $400,000, but then say you're also going to do away with tax cuts, which would raise taxes for everybody, including everybody that's making under $400,000. And she kept going back to that line. She went through that multiple times, where she would admit that yes, they are going to get rid of the Trump tax cuts, but she kept trying to reinforce that they weren't going to raise taxes on anybody making under $400,000. And the utter incoherence and her inability to see that, or I don't think it's her inability to see that, I think it is her lack of faith in the American public to see that. And I think it was really kind of insulting, actually. It kind of insulted the intelligence of the American people. So Pence did a phenomenal job of boxing her in. I guess what was the point I was trying to make there? So, kind of like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris avoided a lot of questions, or avoided answering any specifics about the policies. And of course, when she did answer the specifics about the policies, they were incoherent. They were playing both sides, and they were disingenuous. She was doing it in a way that it was like she wasn't acknowledging that she was playing both sides, despite how obvious it actually was. And much like Joe Biden, Kamala was avoiding the answering questions about the Supreme Court. Pence did a good job. He really boxed her in on the whole idea of the Democrats packing the Supreme Court. And the fact that Kamala Harris refused to provide an answer for that, it really left her exposed. And Pence didn't miss that opportunity, and he barbed that this is a classic case of if you can't win by the rules, you're going to change the rules. And it was a really, really good line that struck home because we've seen that time and time again. I mean, the whole reason why the Republicans are going to be able to get Amy Coney Barrett in with a simple majority is because back in 2013, they were losing on getting 3 D.C. Circuit Appeals Court judges in, so they changed the rules. And there's stacking evidence that every time that they can't win, they're just going to change the rules. We also see this with the Democrats now talking about how they're going to eliminate the filibuster in the Senate so that you no longer need 60 votes to go ahead and pass most legislation in the Senate. So we have so many examples of them changing the rules that him driving it home with that quick, precise, concise, compact barb that rang true, it was really a good point. And in the end, Kamala Harris's non-answer really was an answer in the affirmative. But it also highlighted the lack of transparency in the Biden-Harris agenda. You know, the whole fact that they're not really talking about the specifics of what their agenda is going to be. And, you know, when Biden was asked that in the presidential debates, he says, well, you know, when we get elected, that's going to be what the situation is. Or something like that. It's like, what are you talking about? That's going to be what the situation is. Or whatever he said. It was something along those lines. And it was so clear that he didn't want to answer the question. Which, you know, we all know that the Obama administration was the least transparent administration, at least in my lifetime. I mean, they were so opaque, especially when they came into office, promising to be the most transparent administration in the history of America, and they ended up being one of the least transparent. The Trump team, on the other side, on the other hand, the Trump administration has been the most transparent administration I think I've ever seen. I mean, Trump will just come out and say the quiet thing loudly. And it's a sort of honesty that I think actually serves him well, because while you might be hearing something that you don't necessarily like, you're kind of like, wow, he actually just had the balls to admit it though. Okay, at least I don't feel like this person is going to be lying to me all the time, which is kind of weird that the media calls him the most dishonest president we've ever had. He's oddly the most honest president we've ever had. But back to the whole idea that they were dodging the questions. Pence also did not miss the opportunity. He even said after she failed to answer it and the moderator was trying to move on to the next question, he stopped. He said, let me put it on record that she did not answer the question. He put that front and center in clear and precise terms, which I think was really such a bold or such a strong move for him to do. And he did this multiple times throughout the debate. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Pence's performance at the debate. He was phenomenal through the whole thing. He seemed really, really well prepared, and he came with more facts and hard data than Trump had at his ready in the first debate. While he was cordial and polite, he also made sure that he spoke until he was done speaking. I mean, the moderator, she tried to stop him on so many times, and he just kept going until he was done. And while that did seem... While I could see how some people would think that was kind of rude, I also felt like it showed a certain level of strength, that these are people with something to say, and they're going to get it off their chest. And you can imagine if they're sitting across the table negotiating with foreign leaders and things like that, they're not going to be told when to shut up. They're not going to be told when or how they're going to move forward with the proceedings. They're going to do it on their own terms. And while he wasn't especially rude, he was very measured, he was very calm. He also made sure that he was the alpha sitting at that table, and he absolutely was. So it really made Kamala look fairly weak, especially because she was not willing to do that. And when she did, it seemed pithy. You know, when she did the whole "I'm talking here," it seemed pithy. It seemed like she couldn't handle the fact that she was being challenged. So when Kamala tried to get him on the handling of COVID, he was also prepared and rattled off all the things that the Trump administration had done to battle the pandemic. And it was a pretty impressive list. He had a great counterpunch also when he told Kamala that their COVID plan looked like they plagiarized the Trump administration's plan. And again, with the kind of Trumpian quips, he came in and said something Joe Biden knows a little bit about. Of course, that's a jab at Joe Biden's first presidential run in 1988, where he essentially was undone because he got caught plagiarizing I think it was a British politician's speech from, I think like a decade or two before. So he had, Joe Biden has plagiarism scandals in his background. And so he was able to kind of say that their plan, for all of their talk about how the Trump administration was a complete and utter failure in it, that their plan just looked like what they had actually done, and that they were lying about what the Trump administration had actually done. He also did a really good job of pointing out how the Obama Biden administration was far worse on handling the swine flu pandemic or epidemic, whatever that was. He did a really good job of pointing out how, okay, yeah, we've had 7 million people infected with coronavirus and we've had 200,000 people die, but you guys had 60 million people get infected with swine flu, and you were just lucky that swine flu was not as deadly as COVID-19. So he did a good job of pointing out that, sure, while the death rates are up, we're dealing with a disease that is more deadly than the one that you guys dealt with, and you guys dealt with it horribly. He even pointed out that had the swine flu been as deadly as coronavirus, that they would have had, I think it was 2.2 million people die. So he did a really good job of calling them out and not letting them just use the death count as the only parallel between the two. He let the infection rates speak for themselves, and then he also had at his ready the numbers for if swine flu had been as deadly as COVID, that they would have been way worse off than the Trump administration has been with COVID. So that was really pretty good on his part on being able to do that. He was able to kind of channel a little bit of that Trumpism in his attacks without coming off as bombastic. And it really was a true showing of skill and his ability to adapt in the moment without losing his footing. He was really putting on a clinic, just taking everything in stride that Kamala threw at him, or that she tried to throw at him, because he seemed to have a return every time that she didn't really have an answer for. And all the answers that she did have, again, it felt like that canned ham, that prefabricated argument that is built on the establishment media narrative. It didn't really seem like she was coming with anything that wasn't prepackaged for her. So there was one spot where I think that Pence fell a little short on, and that was going after Kamala's record as a prosecutor. He did hit the right notes, but he didn't hit them hard enough. And this was kind of a shame, because we all saw that it was Tulsi Gabbard just body slamming Kamala on those issues in the primary debates that essentially knocked Kamala Harris out of the race, out of the presidential race. And so he had a perfect opportunity to essentially body slam her the same way Tulsi Gabbard did, maybe even harder. But he didn't quite go for the jugular on it, which was a little bit disheartening. And he also failed to point out that Kamala Harris raised bail money for some pretty lurid people in the Minneapolis riots, including one person that was arrested for stabbing their own friend to death. So, those were a couple points where I thought he could have done a little bit better on, but Pence did do a good job on calling out Biden as a cheerleader for communist China, and I think that is a huge, huge point to make. Excuse me, I gotta take a drink here. While he could have stressed the TPP a bit more, Kamala did do an even worse job on the issue, avoiding the question about whether China was America's adversary or enemy. And I think that's very telling, because we all know that Biden has a lot of business dealings. The Biden family has a lot of business dealings in China. And they were all in favor of the TPP. I believe they also were against the USMCA, which replaced NAFTA. So it really helped further cement the Democrats as being positioned to continue outsourcing American jobs to foreign countries, which at the end of the day only benefits the Wall Street investors and the CEOs of these multinational conglomerates. And it's interesting because you see that that Wall Street is backing Biden, and I think it's like a 5-to-1 clip compared to Trump. And so all of that like Goldman Sachs money and all of that Wall Street money is flowing towards the Democrats, which really kind of cement them now as the corporatist power. And the Republicans are still shaking that image of being the corporatist the party of the rich people. they're still shaking that because they have been the party of, economic prosperity, low taxes, that kind of thing. But the Democrats are taking the cake on the cronyism, and this is what a lot of people don't realize is that when you have taxes on corporations, you're not really taxing the corporations. You are taxing the consumers. I think it was Ronald Reagan once said that corporations don't pay taxes, they just collect them. And that's very true. And there's nobody that loves high corporate taxes more than corporations, because what that does is it raises a higher barrier of entry for any competitor companies, for smaller competition to try to gain a foothold in that market. It makes it much more expensive and much more difficult for smaller competition to do business. And meanwhile, it doesn't cost the large corporations anything, because if they have a monopoly in their market, well, they can charge whatever they want. The consumer's going to pay that, and the taxes are just baked into the cost of the goods and services that we as consumers end up paying. And so the Democrats really are becoming the corporatist party in that sense. That sure, they're going for high taxes, but what people don't think, it's kind of counterintuitive thinking to think that when you raise the taxes on corporations, you're actually helping out the corporations, because you're putting a limiting governor on the ability for people to compete with them in that marketplace. But Kamala really, when it came to talking about China and the outsourcing of jobs, she really didn't offer much of anything. The moderator, she's clearly asked, how do you view China? Do you view them as friendly? Do you view them as adversarial? Or do you view them as an enemy? And of course, it's become the modus operandi of the Biden campaign to not take positions on anything except for Orange Man bad. That seems to be their only position that they can actually take, because they seem like they want to be able to play so many different sides. And part of that is probably because there's a huge fracture in the Democratic base. You have your moderate blue dog Democrats, and then you have your far left progressive Democrats, and they don't, they can't play to one without losing the other. And I'm sure that's put them in a hard spot. At the end of the day, you got to make your choice. You got to actually have a foothold and let the American people know what you actually believe in, what you're actually going to do if you win the office. But nope, we're not seeing that from them. They're cowering. They're cowering under that pressure to pick a side. So the fact that she wouldn't actually take a stance on whether China is an adversary, enemy, or friendly, it really only made Pence's attack on Biden and China that much more credible. And, Kamala tried to accuse Trump of losing the trade war with China, but again, Pence was ready. He swung back hard and he said, oh, we lost the trade war with China? Well, Biden never even fought it. So, that was a good line that really struck not only the weakness of Biden and the corruptibility of Biden, but also the strength of the Trump administration and how they're actually fighting for the American people. They're not afraid to go toe-to-toe with these foreign adversaries. They're not afraid to do it. We had 8 years of Barack Obama running an appeasement strategy with the rest of the world. And it was, I remember it was often called the Obama apology tour. So we're seeing that Trump is not doing that. Trump is not doing that one bit. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit here, so I might need to go ahead and wrap this video up. So let me just go ahead and say that all in all, this debate was a clear win for Pence and Trump. Between the canned ham that was Kamala's line of attack, her general unlikability, her demeanor, and Pence's cool-headed dexterity and dominance of the speaking time, he clearly chewed up Kamala Harris and just spit her back out. He was the alpha in the room, and at the end of the day, if we're talking about leadership positions running the country, we want the alphas doing that job, not the appeasers, not the betas like Obama. Isn't it? Or who Beto O'Rourke, we all remember him. And of course, Biden has said that he's going to put Beto O'Rourke in charge of guns. I would have loved to seen guns come up in this debate. I think that would have been, we haven't really had that come up in any of the debates. But I think it's, with what we've seen over the past year or so in Virginia, and we've had the 2A amendments, we've had the growth of militias, I think gun rights really should come back to being front and center in the arguments, because it's going to be a big factor in the Amy Coney Barrett decision. Or I guess it's not really a decision. She's going to be pushed through. But that's one thing that a lot of people on the right are hoping, is that once she's nominated, that the Supreme Court immediately starts taking all of the 2A cases that they've been holding off because they don't trust that they can actually win the cases against the leftist or the leftist agenda in the Supreme Court. So anyways, guys, that is my take on the vice presidential debate. I thought it was a really good debate. While it wasn't as entertaining, I thoroughly enjoyed watching it, and I thought, again, Pence was the clear winner. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Let me know who you thought won the debate, what you think of my analysis of the debate. Also, if you haven't already yet, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell. You probably won't even know when I post new videos, because we all know it's voices like mine that are first to be taken out back in old Yellard by the folks at Big Tech. And speaking of Big Tech, if you want to follow me on any of their platforms, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Parler at Ram Thorburn. Also, if you like some of the smaller, more alt-tech sites, I'm on Minds and Pill.net at Ram Thorburn. Also, if you'd like to contribute to the channel, there are links to my Subscribe Star, Patreon, and PayPal down in the description below. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful night.